Carl Jung taught us that the path to emotional healing begins when we dare to prioritize ourselves. In a world that constantly pushes us to look outward, to seek validation from others, and to fit into molds that don't belong to us, we rarely stop to ask ourselves, what do I really want? What do I need to feel whole? The answers to these questions don't lie in other people's opinions or external approval. They're found in a deep connection with our own being. When you decide to prioritize yourself, it doesn't mean you're being selfish. On the contrary, it means you're finally paying attention to the most important person in your life, you. Jung warns us that many of our emotional wounds come from living in constant disconnection from our essence. We spend years shaping ourselves to fit society's expectations, family demands, or a partner's needs, until we forget who we really are. But here's the key. Everything we suppress, everything we deny about ourselves doesn't just disappear. It becomes a shadow that sooner or later finds a way to show up in our lives. Maybe you've noticed it in relationships that seem to repeat over and over, in patterns of self-sabotage, or in a constant sense of dissatisfaction. We wonder why life doesn't change, why we keep getting stuck in the same conflicts without realizing that the answer isn't out there. It's inside us. Jung teaches us that healing begins when we stop looking outside and dare to explore our own inner world. Think of your life as a reflection of your internal state. If you're constantly surrounded by people who don't value you, if you feel your energy draining in toxic relationships or situations that don't nourish you, it's not a coincidence. It's your unconscious showing you that there's something within you that needs attention. The question is, are you willing to listen? Most people avoid this process because facing ourselves isn't easy. It means looking straight at our wounds, our insecurities, and accepting that often we're the ones allowing the pain to linger. But this is where real transformation happens. When you prioritize yourself, you start to realize you can't heal if you keep surrounding yourself with what hurts you. Emotional healing doesn't happen in toxic environments. It doesn't happen when you keep allowing the same old things. Jung talked about the importance of individuation, a process where we break free from external influences to discover our own identity. This doesn't mean cutting yourself off from the world. It means stopping relying on it to define who you are. How many times have you felt your happiness depends on someone else's validation? How many times has fear of rejection stopped you from doing what you truly want? When you start prioritizing yourself, something shifts inside you. You stop accepting emotional crumbs. You stop looking for others to fill voids that only you can heal. You realize you don't need to fit into a mold because what you really need is to connect with yourself. And when that happens, healing flows without barriers. The relationships that used to drain you start to fade away. The situations that once caused you distress lose their power over you. Not because the world changes, but because you've changed. You've stopped searching outside for what was always within you. And this is where true freedom emerges, when you understand that your well-being doesn't depend on anyone but yourself. But this process doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage. It takes patience. It means learning to say no, learning to set boundaries, and above all, learning to listen to yourself. How many times have you ignored your intuition because you were scared of disappointing others? How many times have you sacrificed your peace to please someone else? Jung tells us that the cost of ignoring ourselves is too high. It's paid with anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a life that doesn't feel like our own. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you start to notice something curious. The world doesn't feel so chaotic anymore. Relationships stop feeling like a constant battle. Why? Because you've stopped fighting yourself. Emotional healing isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a journey you walk day by day. It's the act of choosing yourself over and over without guilt, without fear. And when you finally do it, everything changes. Not because the world has changed, but because you see it with new eyes. The peace you were searching for outside was always inside you. You just needed to remember that you deserve more. You deserve a life where you don't have to ask permission to be yourself. This is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you take that first step, when you choose to let go of what no longer resonates with you and allow yourself to discover who you really are. It's not easy, but it's the only path to an authentic, fulfilling life. And the question is, are you ready to take it? When you start prioritizing yourself, you begin to see the dynamics you used to miss. Suddenly, you realize certain relationships only worked because you were the one doing all the effort, that there were situations where you gave more than you got, and that often you put up with the unbearable just because you were scared of being alone. But when you choose yourself, something inside you breaks. It's a necessary break, a crack where the light of awareness finally slips through. Jung taught us that everything we repress finds a way to show up in our lives, one way or another. If we don't listen to our needs, we end up projecting them onto others. If we refuse to recognize our worth, we attract people who reinforce that belief. And if we avoid facing our wounds, the world will keep reflecting them back to us until we finally decide to deal with them. This is the process many avoid because it's not comfortable. It means accepting that what we've called love was often just attachment, that what we thought was friendship might have only been convenience, and that most of the decisions we've made were driven by a fear of not being enough. But here's the key. When you start prioritizing yourself, you stop settling. You stop negotiating with your peace. You stop holding up what's unsustainable. And then something happens that terrifies a lot of people. You start losing people. Not because you've changed, but because you've stopped tolerating what you used to put up with. People who once seemed essential in your life start drifting away, some without even an explanation. But what feels like a loss at first soon turns into liberation. Because for every door that closes, space opens up for something more authentic. This process, though necessary, isn't easy. The unconscious resists change because it craves the safety of the familiar. Even if the past was painful, it's still known. And the known gives us a false sense of control. That's why so many people stay in situations that hurt them, in relationships that consume them, because the fear of the unknown feels bigger than the suffering they already know. But this is where real transformation happens, when you dare to let go. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting overnight or pretending nothing matters. It means accepting that you can't force anyone to stay, that you can't make someone value you if they don't want to, and that the only person responsible for your well-being is you. At this point, the world splits into two kinds of people: those who keep looking outside for what they can only find within, and those who decide to face themselves and start their own healing journey. Jung tells us that the path to wholeness isn't easy, but it's the only one worth walking. It's the path of authenticity, the path where you allow yourself to be who you really are, without apologies or fear. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you start to notice something powerful. The quality of your relationships changes. The people who were only in your life for their own gain disappear, and in their place, you start attracting those who truly value your presence. Relationships with reciprocity, where love isn't measured in sacrifices, but in mutual support. Because when you value yourself, you stop accepting less than you deserve. The problem is, most people don't reach this point because letting go is painful. Not just because of the loss itself, but because it forces us to face the part of ourselves that allowed those dynamics for so long. It's easier to blame the other person, to say the problem's out there. But Jung reminds us that everything we experience is a reflection of our inner world. And until we do the work to heal from the inside, we'll keep repeating the same patterns over and over. This is where the concept of the shadow comes in. Jung said, we all carry parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. Fears, insecurities, hidden desires, emotions we've repressed because we were told they're not acceptable. But denying our shadow doesn't make it go away. In fact, the more we ignore it, the more power it has over us. The shadow doesn't vanish because you pretend it's not there. It hides in the relationships you choose, the conflicts you live through, the emotions you struggle to control. When you prioritize yourself, you start making your shadow conscious. You begin to notice your own patterns, the ways you sabotage yourself, the times you say yes when you mean no. And in that moment, you have two choices. Keep living in unawareness, or start taking control of your life. This is where a lot of people stop because facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means admitting we've allowed situations that hurt us, that we've given too much where we weren't valued, that we've accepted less than we deserve. But here's the truth. The pain of facing reality is temporary. The pain of living in denial lasts a lifetime. The path to emotional healing starts when you decide to look at yourself honestly, not with judgment, but with compassion. Jung said we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. We can't change what we're not willing to accept. But the moment you choose to face yourself, no masks, no excuses, something inside you shifts. This is where true healing begins, when you stop looking for someone to blame and start claiming your power. When you realize life doesn't happen to you, you create it with every choice you make. When you understand you don't need anyone's approval to live an authentic life. From this point, transformation becomes inevitable. You start attracting people and situations that reflect your new level of awareness. You stop trying to fit into places you never belonged. The anxiety about the future fades because you trust your ability to navigate life from your truth. But the most beautiful thing of all is the peace that comes when you finally choose yourself. That sense of freedom you only feel when you no longer depend on anything external to feel whole. That certainty that everything you need is already inside you. The question is, are you willing to go through the process? Are you ready to let go of what weighs you down and open yourself to the possibility of something better? It won't be easy, but I promise it'll be worth it. Because when you prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without barriers, and the world stops feeling like a hostile place. It becomes a reflection of your own well-being. When you start prioritizing yourself, something inevitable happens. You change. And when you change, the people around you react. Some will celebrate it, others will question it, and some will try to make you feel guilty for no longer being the person they knew. This is one of the hardest parts of the process, because you'll realize not everyone's ready to accept your transformation. This is where a lot of people backtrack. They fall back into old habits, return to relationships that no longer fulfill them, accept conditions that make them feel small, all out of fear of losing what's familiar. But here's the truth. If you have to shrink yourself to fit into someone's life, that place was never meant for you. Jung teaches us that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, isn't a path everyone will understand. But it doesn't matter if others get it or not. What matters is whether you're willing to keep going, even if it means walking alone for a while. The fear of loneliness is one of the biggest traps in personal growth. We've been taught to believe that being alone means being incomplete, rejected, or a failure. But the reality is, loneliness isn't the problem. The real issue is not knowing how to be with ourselves. Jung said the journey to wholeness requires a period of deep introspection, where we stop looking outside for what we can only find within. And when we learn to be okay in our own company, we stop accepting just anything to avoid the discomfort of silence. At this point, many people experience what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a transition period where everything old falls apart, but the new hasn't arrived yet. It's a void, a feeling of uncertainty, where everything you thought was solid starts to crumble. And this is where most people give up, because the mind wants instant answers, certainty, something to hold on to. But growth doesn't work that way. Real transformation happens when you let yourself sit in that void without trying to fill it with the same old things. When you resist the urge to go back to what's comfortable just because it's familiar. When instead of seeking distractions, you decide to face what you really feel. This is the moment when many realize a big part of their identity was built around others, that their worth depended on being needed, accepted, recognized. And when all those external expectations vanish, they're left with a big question: who am I when no one's watching? For Jung, the answer lies in integrating our whole self, not just the parts we show the world, but our shadows, our wounds, our deepest truths. When you stop running from yourself, when you dare to look at your life honestly, something changes. The need to please disappears. The urgency to fit in dissolves. And for the first time, you start to feel free. At this point, the world will test you. Situations from the past will come back to see if you've really learned the lesson. Relationships you thought you'd moved on from will knock on your door again. People who used to manipulate you will try it one more time. And this is how you'll know if you've truly changed. Not because the world looks different, but because you respond differently. You no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer feel obligated to convince anyone of your worth. You understand that not every connection is meant to last forever, and losing some people isn't a tragedy, it's an act of alignment. The energy you used to spend trying to be enough for others, you now invest in yourself. And while that might feel strange at first, it's the greatest act of self-love you can do. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you start noticing patterns you used to ignore. You realize life isn't a random string of events. It's a mirror of your own consciousness. Everything you see out there reflects what you carry inside. Jung talks about the principle of projection. What bothers us in others, what we admire or reject, is just a manifestation of parts of ourselves we haven't yet recognized. If you keep attracting relationships where you feel undervalued, if you always end up in situations where you have to overextend yourself, ask yourself, what part of me still believes I'm not enough? Because the answer isn't in the outside world, it's in the relationship you have with yourself. When you do this inner work, something amazing happens. Life stops feeling like a struggle. The anxiety about the future fades because you trust your ability to handle whatever comes. Relationships stop being a source of conflict and become a space for mutual growth. And most importantly, you reclaim your power. This doesn't mean everything will be perfect, that you'll never feel fear or insecurity again. It means you now have the tools to not let those emotions control you, that instead of acting from lack, you start acting from abundance, that instead of desperately seeking love, you realize love has always been within you. Jung taught us that life isn't about erasing pain, it's about learning to integrate it. True healing isn't escaping our wounds, it's embracing them and giving them new meaning. When you let yourself do this, you stop living in the past, you stop worrying about the future, and you start experiencing the only reality that truly matters, the present. This is where peace lives, not in the absence of problems, but in the certainty that no matter what happens, you can hold yourself up. Not in others' approval, but in the confidence that at the end of the day, you are enough just as you are. This is the gift of prioritizing yourself. You don't just reclaim your energy, your time, and your peace. You reclaim something even more valuable, your authenticity. Because when you stop being what the world expects and start being who you really are, emotional healing flows without barriers, and life finally becomes a reflection of your own truth. When you finally decide to prioritize yourself, you realize a lot of your suffering didn't come from the outside world. It came from the stories you told yourself, stories that made you believe you had to try harder to be loved, that you had to adapt to be accepted, that you had to constantly prove your usefulness to be valued. But the moment you start questioning those beliefs, you start seeing the truth clearly. It was never your job to carry what doesn't belong to you. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious is full of inherited patterns and beliefs we often don't challenge. Ideas about love, success, happiness, loyalty, sacrifice. These shape us from a young age, and without realizing it, we end up repeating stories that aren't even ours. But the awakening happens when you start asking, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I keep holding on to dynamics that hurt me? Why do I keep tolerating the intolerable? This questioning is uncomfortable because it forces us to see that many of our choices haven't really been ours. They're the result of what we were taught to accept as normal. Maybe you grew up watching your parents sacrifice everything for others without getting anything back, and now you think love means giving it all, even if it costs you your peace. Maybe you were told you're only valuable if you're productive, and now you feel guilty every time you let yourself rest. Or maybe you learned that being strong means enduring, and that's why you struggle to let go even when something no longer makes sense. But here's the truth. You can unlearn everything that's held you back. You can choose new paths, new beliefs, new ways of relating to yourself and others. You're not doomed to repeat the same stories forever. Jung tells us that destiny isn't fixed. It's the result of what we do with our consciousness. And when you decide to expand your consciousness, your reality changes. When you prioritize yourself, you start realizing love shouldn't be a fight. That peace shouldn't be an unreachable goal. That happiness shouldn't depend on external factors. That you don't need to prove your worth because just existing is enough. And this is where real transformation begins. The people who once had power over you lose their grip. The situations that used to shake you don't carry the same weight anymore. Not because the world has changed, but because you've changed how you relate to it. You stop trying to be understood by people who never bothered to try. You stop forcing yourself to fit where you were never welcomed. You stop holding on to what's clearly meant to stay in the past. This is freedom. Not the fake freedom of doing whatever you want without consequences, but the inner freedom of knowing you don't need anything outside yourself to feel complete. The security of being alone without feeling empty. The certainty that no matter what happens, you'll be okay because you've finally learned to be with yourself. Jung said, individuation is the most important process of our existence, the path to integration, to wholeness. And while this path often involves pain, loss, and loneliness, it's the only one that can lead us to a life with meaning. When you start prioritizing yourself, when you let go of the old versions of you that only existed to please others, life rewards you in unexpected ways. New people come into your life, opportunities that once seemed impossible start showing up, and above all, you experience a peace you've never felt before, because you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer searching outside for what was always within you. This is where many people feel they've finally woken up, that life isn't about surviving or pleasing anymore, but about experiencing, creating, feeling. About living from a place of authenticity instead of fear. But the work doesn't end here. Consciousness is like a muscle. It needs constant exercise. Because society, family, your environment, they'll keep trying to pull you back into old dynamics. They'll keep trying to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel selfish for choosing yourself. But the difference now is that you know the truth. You know there's nothing more valuable than your peace, that there's nothing more important than your well-being, and that at the end of the day, the only choices that matter are the ones that bring you closer to yourself. The world changes when you change. Relationships get better when you improve the one you have with yourself. Opportunities show up when you stop acting from lack and start acting from fullness. Jung tells us the unconscious responds to our deepest beliefs, and when you truly believe you deserve better, the universe finds a way to show you. And the question is, are you ready to see it? Are you ready to let go of everything that no longer resonates with you and open yourself to the possibility of something entirely new? It won't be easy, but I promise it'll be worth it. Because when you finally decide to prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without barriers, and life becomes what it was always meant to be, a reflection of your own truth. When you start living from your authenticity, something curious happens. Things that used to confuse you become clearer. Relationships that once drained you become unbearable. Situations you tolerated without question now feel heavy. This isn't a coincidence, it's growth. It's a sign you're evolving and that you can't keep ignoring what your soul's been trying to tell you all along. Jung taught us that consciousness isn't static. It expands as we dare to look inward. And when that happens, the world can't stay the same. Because what you see outside is just a reflection of what's inside you. If there's clarity within you, there'll be clarity out there. If there's chaos inside, that's what you'll find outside. That's why when you prioritize yourself, you start attracting experiences that match your new energy. You no longer need to force connections, beg for love, or prove to anyone that you deserve respect. Everything flows naturally because you're not operating from lack anymore. You're operating from fullness. This shift doesn't happen overnight. There'll be moments when you doubt yourself, when the pull to go back to the old ways feels strong, when loneliness feels too heavy. But this is the real test. Are you going to betray yourself out of fear of being alone? Or are you going to hold on to your authenticity until what's truly meant for you finds you? The unconscious always tests us, not because the universe wants to punish us, but because we need to prove to our own mind that we're ready for the next level. That's why, just when you start prioritizing yourself, people from the past might show up trying to drag you back into old patterns. Life might throw situations at you that you used to struggle with, not because you're slipping, but because you need to reaffirm that this time you'll choose differently. When you pass this test, when you refuse to go back to what hurt you, something incredible happens. Your energy shifts completely. You're no longer anchored in fear, no longer trapped in the need for approval, no longer waiting for others to validate your path. And when this happens, the world responds in the most unexpected ways. Opportunities start coming effortlessly. The people who enter your life do so with a different intention, from respect, from admiration, from authenticity. Everything that once felt out of reach starts materializing, not because the world changed, but because you now believe you deserve it. This is where many feel they've finally woken up, that all the suffering they went through had a purpose, to bring them to this moment. And while pain is never easy, when you look back, you realize every fall, every loss, every rejection was really a liberation in disguise. Jung reminds us that the unconscious doesn't forget, but it can heal. The wounds from the past don't disappear, but we can change how we relate to them. They're no longer chains holding us back. They're reminders of how far we've come. And when you stop seeing your story as a series of failures and start seeing it as a path of evolution, everything changes. The problem is, most people never get to this point. They stay stuck in resentment, nostalgia, guilt. They keep looking back, wishing things had been different. But real power isn't in what could have been. It's in what you can build from now on. When you prioritize yourself, you stop living in the past. You don't need to justify what happened. You don't need to mourn what you lost. You simply accept that everything happened as it was meant to, and that every experience prepared you to be who you are today. And this is where life gets truly interesting. Because when you let go of the weight of what was, you realize the future is entirely in your hands. That there's no fixed destiny you're bound to, but endless possibilities waiting to be explored. The only question left is, what are you going to do with this new freedom? Are you going to keep repeating the old stories, or are you going to dare to write something completely new? Most people choose what's safe. They stick to the known, even if it means giving up their happiness. But those who truly dare to prioritize themselves, those who live from their authenticity without fear of the consequences, discover that life has so much more to offer than they ever imagined. Because when you choose yourself, the world chooses you too. When you value yourself, life gives you more reasons to keep doing it. When you let go of what doesn't serve you, what's truly meant for you finds a way to show up. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's the natural law of energy. It's the reflection of your own growth. It's the inevitable result of making the most important decision of all, the decision to be true to yourself. When you finally decide to prioritize yourself, life takes a completely different turn. You stop clinging to what hurts. You stop trying to convince anyone to value you. You stop living in the uncertainty of whether you're enough. Because deep within you, you know you are. You don't need to search outside for what's always been inside. But this doesn't mean the path will always be easy. There'll be days when you doubt yourself, when old wounds try to speak louder than your new awareness, when you're tempted to go back to the old just because it's familiar. But the difference now is that you know the truth. Your peace is priceless. Your well-being isn't negotiable. Your worth doesn't depend on anyone's opinion, and that changes everything. Jung taught us that the purpose of life isn't superficial happiness, it's wholeness. And wholeness only comes when we dare to be who we truly are. No masks, no fear, no waiting for validation. It's about living from authenticity, embracing our light and our shadows, accepting that every experience, no matter how hard, has been part of our evolution. When you reach this point, you don't seek approval anymore, you seek connection. You don't want to fit in, you want to belong to a space where you can be yourself. And this is where the real magic happens, because when you live from your truth, you attract the people and opportunities that are truly aligned with you. That's why this message doesn't end here. If this reflection resonated with you, if at any point you felt these words speaking straight to your soul, it's because this knowledge isn't just for you. There are so many people out there who need to hear this too. People trapped in dynamics that hurt them, still searching outside for what they can only find within themselves. This is the moment to share this message with the world. If you've ever felt alone in this process, remember there are thousands of others going through the same thing, and every word you share could be the light someone else needs to wake up. Leave me a comment below and tell me what part of this message touched something inside you. Share what you're ready to change, what relationships or habits you've decided to let go of, or just tell me how you feel after hearing this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell so this message keeps reaching more people. Every time you engage with this content, you're not just helping it spread, you're becoming part of a movement of transformation and awareness. Because the world needs more people living from their authenticity, more people who dare to be themselves without fear, who choose peace over chaos, who decide to prioritize themselves without guilt. If this message reached you, it's because you're ready to take the next step. Share this content, leave your comment, subscribe, and always remember this. When you prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without barriers, and your life becomes a reflection of your own truth. See you in the next video, and until then, keep choosing yourself over and over again.